This isn't about Vatican II anymore. This isn't about the old Mass, Latin Mass versus the new Mass. We are seeing church and a Vatican, again, the human element, there's been an infiltration, and they are using the power and the moral authority of the church to help establish a new world order, in my opinion.
Joining me right now is Michael Matt with the Remnant newspaper and Remnant TV. He's also the coordinator behind the Catholic Identity Conference. And recently, at the most recent Catholic Identity Conference, so I've invited him onto the program to be with us. Michael, thank you for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the Viganò situation. So Viganò was supposed to do an interview with you. He sent you a video instead, and you made the decision, the executive decision, not to play it. Why didn't you want to play it at your conference?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the chance to talk to your audience about that, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding, and it's really very easy to set this aside. It's not something people need to get worked up about. Archbishop Viganò and I have been friends for a long time. I think I'm one of the few people that's actually met him, so I know him very well. And this was something that came up that was absolutely unavoidable. And you're right, we had agreed, we had advertised for a couple months beforehand that His Excellency would be doing an interview. At the last moment, for reasons which are pretty much his, he decided against that format. So I think to a large extent, I think he just probably didn't understand the prominence that we were going to give his presentation at the CIC. It was going to be the last word, the final shot, the out the door message from the CIC. It was a big deal, you know. So that's probably something he didn't understand. I say this in defense of his decision to pull the interview. So when we decided we couldn't do a live interview by Zoom, which is what we always do at the CIC, if we're going to bring somebody in, we're going to do it live, because watching a video is not exactly exciting, especially as a closing statement. So he decided not to do it. And I said, okay, well, let's he said, I'll Zoom in a statement. And I know His Excellency very well. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. I need to have a look at it before we close. And so he sent me a video the day that the conference was beginning, which is Friday morning. Sent me a video. Honestly, I looked at it just for a little bit, and I said, there's just no way, because this was the most important Catholic Identity Conference that we had ever been able to put together. So we had Cardinal Muller there. We had Bishop Strickland there. We had 2 or 3 diocesan priests there. We had priests from the Fraternity of St. Peter there, all of whom needed to be not protected, because people will make fun of me if I use that word, but in a sense, that's what it was. I had a responsibility to make sure they didn't run into trouble with their bosses after the CIC. And so it was a very easy decision to make, despite the fact that Archbishop Viganò is an old and dear friend. It was an easy decision to make. I cannot have a conference at which Bishop Strickland is speaking. He was our keynote Saturday night. I can't have it close on a discussion of whether Bergoglio is the Pope or not. And as I said in that video, and as I wrote to Archbishop Viganò, I said, this is a discussion I'll happily have in the pages of the Remnant under the topic of debating the relevant issues. Obviously, it's a very fair debate right now. So that it got out of control pretty quickly. And the other person I had there was Bishop Schneider, and the statement actually mentions Bishop Schneider's position by name. He mentions Bishop Schneider, Archbishop Viganò does, and I didn't think it was fair to not have Bishop Schneider be given a chance to respond, you see. So we made that decision, and all hell sort of broke loose, and I was called a coward and everything else. Well, that's fine. I get it. It comes with the territory. But I have been told by the bishops, including Bishop Strickland, thank you. It was good. We couldn't have, probably withstood what might have come out of that had you let it go. So I'm in good conscience. I'm also in contact with Archbishop Viganò. Hopefully we can get this fixed up because, as you say, Unite the Clans is my thing. And I haven't given up hope on it. I think we can still, hope to salvage the alliance that we had and move forward from here.
To be clear, I'm not a sedevacantist. I do recognize Francis as the vicar of Christ, even if he chooses not to use that title. Yes, we've got major problems with this current pontificate. We also have no means by which to address it. So guess what? Let us just be holy and faithful and zealous and virtuous and soldier on. So I find myself in that camp. What about you, Michael Matt? Where are you?
I'm absolutely. And when you say the Viganò camp, well, this is a fairly new and ill-defined camp at this point in terms of sedevacantism, because Archbishop Viganò has not been a sedevacantist. He's not proclaimed himself a sedevacantist. and even in this latest dust up, he doesn't proclaim himself a sedevacantist. He just asks several very probing questions about how is it possible for someone who holds the positions and who came into office as Bergoglio did, how is it possible for him to be Pope? So I think in fairness, we'd have to say Archbishop Viganò is discerning at the moment. What is my position? Is he absolutely not the Pope? Are we questioning this? Because questioning the situation, I think anybody who's not questioning it right now is fooling themselves. So I find Bishop Schneider's position convincing. I also have heard, I just interviewed Cardinal Muller just 2 weeks ago, and he makes the point that we could eventually come to a situation with a Pope who through heresy loses his office. I've heard Cardinal Burke make the same argument, that it is possible to lose through heresy the office. So I don't think Bishop Schneider allows for that. Bishop Schneider is a saint. He's just a beautiful prince of the church. I don't mean to be critical of him at all, but I don't think his position allows for that to happen. God's going to protect the church from a Pope who loses his office through heresy. So I'll tell you what, I'm a layman. I'm not a theologian. I'm looking at all these positions, and the only thing I feel very secure about in my own editorial position is if we don't know for sure, then I want to do what is going to allow me to have the most ability to undermine the Bergoglian, the Francis, the Synod on synodality agenda. And I am honestly convinced that if Francis were to get wind of the fact that the entire traditional Catholic movement has declared him not the Pope, this would delight him. His opposition would disappear, and he would be that Team Francis would be very happy. And I think there are ways of sort of verifying this. Because if you look at the first week of the Synod, first 10 days, who was dominating the news? Was it Archbishop Viganò, who was saying, well, maybe he's not the Pope, or was it Cardinal Burke and the Dubia Cardinals? No question. It was Cardinal Burke and the Dubia Cardinals who were making all the waves, who were shocking the press, and who the Vatican had to deal with. And that's kind of where I come down as a layman, as a guy who likes to strategize and do the best that I can do with my humble means of fighting the good fight. I don't want to pitch a slowly spinning softball right over the Vatican's home plate that they can just smack out of the thing, because all Francis has to do is look at the world and say, do you have a Pope? And the world says, yes, we have a Pope. And he says, who's the Pope? And the entire world points at Francis and says, you're the Pope. So that leaves us, anybody who's going to be saying he's not the Pope, very, very marginalized and inconsequential as far as Francis is concerned. So from a strategic point of view, I'm not sure what's to be gained. I think we have to do everything we possibly can to resist this revolution that Francis is engaging in. And I think the most effective position is to stay right in the heart of the church, to not play around with this idea that we may or may not think he's the Pope right now. That's a perfectly legitimate debate, I think, to have behind closed doors or whatever with competent authority. But from my point of view, I prefer to stay right where I'm at and to just, yes, Pope Francis, we resist you to your face.
And maybe sometimes, maybe a lot of times, I'm like the half glass empty kind of a guy. You seem to be the half glass full guy. Why is it that you think that the clarity coming out of this pontificate is good for us, even though he's the master of ambiguity?
I would say to answer that, you have to figure, your audience would have to consider where I'm coming from personally, where Michael Matt's coming from. And that's 30, 40 years in this fight. So I can't even begin to tell you how I was a young man, but how discouraging and seemingly, like humanly speaking, hopeless things seemed back in the 70s when all this was avant-garde and modernism was coming in and felt banners were still cool and guitars and heresy and everything was so the future, Since that time, we've seen, and that time we were very lonely. Since that time, you've seen it fall apart. You've seen so many people, they have fatigue, they have modernist fatigue. The church is in a human element is becoming embarrassing. A lot of people good people don't really want to associate with the modern mainstream Catholic Church because it's a mess, So when I say that I feel not depressed as a lot of other folks do, I think it's because we have the largest coalition right now, the traditional Catholic movement, which is really becoming just the Catholic movement. That's all it is. We've invented nothing new. But those of us who are accepting, we were taught the faith from our fathers, or trying to hand it down to our sons, there's never been such unanimity as there is right now. And I'm talking about even in high places in the church. So I don't know, I would use, for example, Cardinal Muller. To me, it's stunning that we had him at the Catholic Identity Conference this year. We have disagreements, I'm sure, in a lot of things. He's not a traditionalist, but he too is standing against this revolution, which seems poised right now to rip the church right in half. So I don't know how I can look at Pope Francis and not be grateful on some level that he has, the old expression, jump the shark, that he has done it to such an extent that we now have the largest coalition of opposition that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I keep joking about that. I feel like writing a letter of gratitude to Pope Francis because he's clarified so many things. In a way, he's more honest than some of the leadership we've seen over the past 50 years, because he comes right out and says, I'm going to change the church permanently. You're never going to change it back. And a lot of people say, well, no, you can't do that. And a lot of priests and a lot of bishops and even cardinals are saying, no, you can't do that. So I just, from a human point of view, I just don't feel so alone anymore. I feel like that we have quite a fighting chance, humanly speaking, of bringing an opposition to the Vatican. And then, of course, the divine element. This is the church is God's to save, and he will save it. But I think we're poised in a good position to do whatever we can as the human element of the church to help make that happen.
You just mentioned Muller. Cardinal Muller has changed quite a bit in his own theological career over the span of his life. Dare I say, even more traditional, even though he's not a traditionalist. So yeah. Are you seeing a change in the hearts of cardinals? Do you think there are more cardinals that are like, I better speak up now or forever hold my peace, my judgment will come?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Because again, there's a divine element to this and there's a human element. And I think to a great degree, to a great extent, if you look at Cardinal Burke, for example, what's his main mission been over the past 10 years? He doesn't want to give them Vatican II. So Cardinal Burke struggles to try to find the hermeneutic of continuity. Now, I don't agree with him on this. I think Vatican II was a disaster, but I respect what he's trying to do. He's like, don't just give the modernists, the enemies of the church, the council. I can come up with this traditional interpretation. I can connect this to tradition. I will not gift wrap Vatican II, just give it to them. And I think he's realizing we've moved beyond that now. This isn't about Vatican II anymore. This isn't about the old Mass, Latin Mass versus the new Mass. We are seeing a church, a Vatican, again, the human element. The divine element of the church, as you know, is fine. It's inviolate. It's in God's hands. There's nothing wrong with the church. The human element, there's been an infiltration, and they are using the power and the moral authority of the church to help establish a new world order, in my opinion. I understand that. Ooh, that's conspiracy, tinfoil hat, and all of that. But what else is going on? That's what seems to be happening. And I think there are a lot of cardinals who recognize that something terrible is going to happen now. And Cardinal Muller was positively eager in my interview with him a couple of weeks ago to bring up Davos, to bring up the World Economic Forum. And I've been waiting for 2 or 3 years for that to happen. Your Excellencies, Your Eminence, it says they're coming after you. You don't understand. This is not about liberal Catholics anymore, traditional Catholics versus progressives. This is about atheists, secularists, one world globalists trying to use the Catholic Church to have the moral authority to get done what they want to get done. And any bishop, any cardinal, any layman, any priest who gets in the way is going to have troubles. And I think that's where we start seeing a certain awakening among cardinals and bishops. Like, yeah, if I don't do something, if I don't, the day is coming where if I don't bless gay marriage, for example, I'm going to be considered a hater. I'm going to be arrested. They're going to come after. I mean, there's these human considerations that I think a lot of them are facing now. And as terrifying as that is, it's also a wake-up call that I think might be the salvation of the human element of the church if enough of them realize what the true agenda is. And it's not a good agenda for them, for any of us. It's a terrifying agenda.
Do you think it's possible we could see cardinals come out and say, I no longer think Francis is the Pope? Do you think that's even possible at this point?
Obviously, it's possible. Whether it's feasible, whether any of them would take that step, it's hard to say, because I agree with what you said before. The Avignon captivity was an exception, and it was a contested papacy. So what Bishop Schneider is saying is, in a non-contested papacy, pontificate, when you have total unanimity of the cardinals, God will supply. That is, he is the Pope. And so I think that's what you have right now. And I remember talking to the historian Henry Sire once, and he made the point. He said, people, they put too much emphasis on this. We do nowadays, not realizing that in the Middle Ages, the Pope was whomever the people of Rome said was the Pope. It was just that simple, you know? And we have, I think, a sort of we've made it complicated, you know? It's like this idea that you can't criticize a Pope because the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost selected him. Well, I don't know if you've ever covered a conclave. I've done the last 2 conclaves. There is no doubt in how that entire process takes place, that they're trying to keep politics out. They're sealing that Sistine Chapel. They're swearing themselves to secrecy. Why? Because the will of the Holy Spirit can be thwarted. Politics can come into it. The human element can come into it. So I think there has been sort of a Pollyanna 50ism Catholicism with respect to, you know, the papacy, how a given candidate is made Pope, and the extent to which he can be criticized. And now, you know, this idea that he loses his office through heresy. Well, you know, there's a lot of very interesting questions. I don't know how much time you have, but I mean, when does he lose his pontificate? When does he lose his office, a given Pope? One day he says something heretical. Do I, Michael Matt, get to say he's not the Pope? Like right now, in that instant, do I get to say that? Because then what happens to due process? What happens to the rightful authority bringing to the Holy Father's attention his heresy, trying him, whatever it would take, giving him a chance to recant? What happens to that whole process? If we pounce on it right away, I think that causes all sorts of problems, and we see this with the great heresy of the particular versus general judgment of John the 22nd, where he took on a heretical position and he preached it publicly, but no one talks about him having ever lost his office in the interim. And then he recanted at the end and repented. St. Pius X, same way. He talks about the synthesis of all heresies, modernism. And yet he doesn't say they're outside the church trying to get in. He says these heretics are at the heart and bosom of the church. So I think it's very important for us to be extremely cautious on what we think we know and what we're allowed to do and the condemnations and the judgments that we can make, especially when it's always been understood that the church, the teaching of the church, that only a future God and a future Pope can judge a reigning pontiff. I know there's a lot to debate there as well, but that is the rule of thumb. And when you start thinking about the problems from jumping the shark to do something other than that, it gets extremely problematic. And I, for one, do not want to spend the rest of this war in the fever swamps wearing a tinfoil hat talking conspiracy theories with my mom and some of her friends. You know what I mean? Like, I really want to stay engaged, and I think that's what we should be talking about.
Going down the sedevacantist route, and to some degree, I feel like it's a bit of a get out of jail free card. I do not want to have to suffer. I do not want to have to be impacted by this insanity, this crazy, this chaos, this heresy, this whatever. It seemed like to me that you were saying we have to endure this cross with patient virtue, heroic virtue, courageous virtue, in spite of it all. But yet so many Catholics today are looking for that get out of jail free card. What would you say to that?
I very much agree with that. I agree with that very much. And I think it's simplistic and maybe a bit sophomoric to say, well, you know, before when Jesus was being crucified the first time, that was before Pentecost. The church hadn't started yet. It was a different situation. I don't think so. I think that would have been the most difficult thing in the world, to maintain belief that our Lord was God when he died on the cross. That would have been incredibly difficult, and most probably did fall away in that period, that terrible period. So no, it's not easy, but that's how the church began. That's the lesson that Jesus teaches us right away, that you're going to be scandalized even by me hanging from a cross. So I feel the same way now. It's like, yes, Francis is very difficult. And sometimes I really struggle with charity, and you got to be patient and, you know, all these things. But I do believe that God is calling us to stay in here, to go all the way to the foot of the cross again. And you're not going to have a beautiful, simple, easy solution. You know, people say you lack courage if you don't denounce him as the anti-pope. No, that would be so much easier. That would be so much easier to be able to say, he's not the Pope, he's an anti-pope, forget about it. I struggle every day with, you know, like I say, being patient, but it would be easier to do that. It's much more difficult to say, boy, the church is really suffering this time. And we've got to stay, and we've got to get embarrassed, and people are going to make fun of us. But we got to stay with the church and even continue to pray for Bergoglio right up to the foot of the cross with Francis. Yeah, it's really, really tough, but I very much agree with you. The get out of jail card, free card, I think is, yeah, he's not the Pope. I just don't see that as as the viable answer. And I don't know what it solves either. Like, again, strategically, what changes if I say that? Sometimes I get the impression with my critics, if you would just say he's not the Pope, everything would be fine. But what would change? He still wears white. He still appoints all the bishops. He's still in charge.
Exactly.
What changes except me having some peace of mind? Okay, he's not the Pope. But the war is identical. The strategy is the same. We still have to stand against what's happening, what's not Catholic, what's new, what's novel, and what's revolutionary coming out of the Vatican. So I don't even know what it would necessarily solve to come out, for me anyway, to come out and say he's not the Pope. Nothing would change. I have to resist what he's doing. I have to resist him to the face. And if he is the Pope, which I believe he is, it's more difficult to resist a sitting pontiff to his face. You better get it right with God if you're going to do that, because that's not a small issue. That's not a small matter. So all of us are praying about it and trying to do the right thing, but it's not easy.
If they in fact push us to the point of LGBTQ ideology, indoctrination, female ordination, and whatever else they decide to toss our way, if that gets ramrodded through, I don't think the next big argument, the next big issue will be the traditional Latin Mass. I think it'll be general schism and chaos and civil war. What do you think? What do you think it will be the next big thing?
I think you're absolutely right, because let's not forget where this all started. The Traditionis Custodes thing. I mean, it started with Team Francis banning Novus Ordo masses inside the Basilica of St. Peter, private masses inside the Basilica, all those side altars. If you've ever been to Rome, it's a beautiful thing. When you walk in, you see priests from all over the world saying, now in this case, Novus Ordo masses. It started with that. A lot of bishops right now, I think, are feeling the pinch. They don't know what's happening. They're not traditionalists, but they're being put in an impossible situation by the Vatican vis-a-vis Traditionis Custodes. Women priests, blessing gay unions. A lot of non-traditionalist but decent priests and bishops right now are saying, okay, the Vatican is talking about blessing gay unions, but the Vatican never talks about homosexual acts, sexual acts. That's what's actually happening. And they know that it's happening, because it would be preposterous to suggest that it's not happening. So we're not actually talking about being charitable and welcoming to a gay couple. We're talking about blessing homosexual acts. It's just that the Vatican doesn't want to admit that, doesn't want to say that. Well, that puts a lot of good priests and bishops in a very, very difficult state. And if they're going to be blessing and improving that, that's going to violate their consciences. And of course, you don't have to be a traditionalist to realize that that's wrong, that you can't do that, as Mueller and Burke and everybody's saying. It's a mortal sin. We're actually hearing the word mortal sin again from the lips of cardinals, because that's precisely what's happening at the Synod right now. They're deliberating over whether or not to bless mortal, sinful behavior. So yeah, I think that to say it's just the Latin Mass thing is very telling. And I keep telling people my opinion on that. When you think you don't matter as traditional Catholics, when you think it doesn't matter, not paying attention to you, believe me, for the past 40 years of the traditional Catholic movement, what happened most of the time was ignoring traditionalists, acting like they don't matter. And that's a very effective means of fighting a war. Well, now in the middle of everything that's going on in the world, and lots going wrong in the world right now, the Vatican is positively fixated on traditional Catholics. The Vatican is fixated on the traditional Latin Mass. That's extremely telling. So please, don't tell me that it doesn't matter what we do, that the fight that we're doing to save our own souls first and foremost, our children's souls, to preserve the faith of our fathers, the liturgy of our. Don't tell me that doesn't matter, because I know from the lips of Francis himself how much that matters. They are making fools of themselves, trying to shut down the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, counter-revolution, if you want to call it that, for a reason. So I think we know we're on the right side. We know what's going on. We're not insignificant. But the revolution is not just about taking the Latin Mass down. The revolution is about equity and inclusion right now. There's not going to be an exceptional church, just like there's not going to be an exceptional country. They're getting rid of the United States of America for the same reason, if they want to pursue this great reset idea. And the Catholic Church cannot be higher than others. It can't be superior. They call it religious supremacism. They're trying to crush it. So I'm absolutely convinced that what you just said is right. It's not just a matter of traditionalists versus non-traditionalists. It's a matter of Catholics versus globalism. That's what, and I understand that sounds conspiratorial. Just wait a few months. We're going to see it. We're going to see more and more proof that that's what this is all about.
How do you unite the clans given all of this? How do you bring trads and non-trads together? How do you bring trads together, for crying out loud? I mean, the trads are so splintered by themselves. Is it even possible to truly unite the clans given the circumstances today?
Yeah, I think it's not only possible, I think it's already happening for sure, but maybe even to a degree, it's already happened. Like I say, last week at the CIC, the Catholic Identity Conference, we never saw such unity from such a diverse group, cardinals and bishops and New York police officers and, regular priests coming in. So I always say to people, remember, like if we lived in the Middle Ages, whatever was going on in Rome, in the Vatican, we wouldn't even know about it for months. You got that famous example of Lepanto when Don John of Austria has the victory because of Our Lady's intercession, the Rosary. The secondary miracle of that event was Pope St. Pius V finding out about it in a decent amount of time. He miraculously found out about this because everybody knew in those days it would take months. Word would take a long time. So we're fixated on every hiccup, every statement, every little thing that's happening in the Vatican. It's difficult to absorb that. Most people don't have the theological training to even understand how to make arguments to refute half of what's coming out. So I would say to people, what does God actually want us? Why did God make us? Did he make us to monitor the Vatican and to make sure everything was kosher up there and everything was, there was no heresy and no, apostasy? No, God made us to know, love, and serve him. Nothing changes. It's just, it's frustrating because people think everything is changing. Yeah, but our life, I'm a father of 7 children. Nothing's changed. We still have to get up every morning, have our breakfast, say our prayers, do the homeschool thing, say the rosary at night. Francis can't change any of that. And the other thing that people should understand, I don't even have to disobey Francis as a layman. He's not told me to do anything. His entire reign of Pope Francis, he's never called me up. He's never given me an order. He's never told me to do anything. So I don't even have to struggle with, should I disobey or shouldn't I disobey? Although we don't have to struggle with that anymore at all. When you have people like Cardinal Muller saying, you must resist, that takes us all off the hook. But my point is, day to day, we need to do the same thing now that our fathers were doing in the 1970s and great-grandfathers doing back in the 1870s. Save your soul, raise your children, continue to go. Francis can't change any of that. And so I think that's where you unite the clans. People think it's all about uniting the Society of St. Pius X with the Fraternity of St. Peter priests. That would be very precocious on my part to think we could get that problem, the society versus fraternity, resolved with a little Unite the Clans initiative. But we can, what we can do, and what we already have done. I'm very much united with families that go to the Society of St. Pius X masses, with men like yourself that go to the Fraternity of St. Peter masses, go to the diocesan masses. Every year on the Sharp Pilgrimage, I walk with people who go to all those different options. Some of them are still in the new mass, trying to find their way to the traditional Latin mass. And we are totally united in being the very best soldiers of Christ that we can possibly be, and making it our mission to proclaim the kingship of Christ every single day, no matter what. And nothing going on at this synod is going to change that. So that's where, to answer your question, that's where I think uniting the clans is plausible, it's feasible, it's happening right now. We need to continue to do it.
How do we change people's minds to say, we love the Pope so much that we would courageously speak the truth to wake him up? Or we love the church so much that we would not tolerate the wolves in sheep's clothing or the snake in the grass? Someone's got to speak up. How do we convince the average Catholic that we aren't just causing more problems, but we are trying to bring about a greater good?
Yeah, I think the analogy of the alcoholic father is a good one. I think that going back to Galatians and St. Paul and St. Peter and that spat, again, it starts off right away, right at the very beginning, where you had St. Paul resisting Peter to his face over an issue. It doesn't even matter what the issue was. The point is he resisted him for the good of Peter and for the good of the church. And I think that to a large extent, that's something that's almost like human nature. If a father has gone wayward, you have not only an obligation or a duty, but you do have it. It is a matter of obligation, not just a right, but it's an obligation to correct authority. And you can consult the Summa Theologica for that. St. Thomas Aquinas, the teaching of the church, that authority, if it goes wayward, must be respectfully resisted and corrected. we have an obligation before God to do that. The faith comes first. And I think most people, reasonable people, are going to understand that we feel an obligation. And as a Catholic, I talk to non-Catholics a lot. You've got to understand, it's embarrassing. It's like, oh, boy, you really have to explain a lot. It's not something we want to do. It's not something that we enjoy doing, being critical. But we're not the caricature that the Protestants set up of Catholics, that we just, yes, Holy Father, we will do whatever we want. When do you want me to kill my babies? I'll do it for you if you want. You know what I mean? Like that's a caricature that we do not do. Catholics do use, it is faith and reason. It's got to be reasonable. So even the resistance against rightful authority, if you're in a position, if you're educated, and if you've done your homework and your study, you do have to take a reasonable position of resistance against rightful authority as well. And you can share that with Protestant friends and say, this is how Catholicism actually works. We're going through a crisis right now, like every church, every religion in the world is, by the way, and so are we, and we have to resist. And then as far as the state of a contest, or they'll come and say, you can't do that. He's the Pope. You can't resist him. He's a sitting Pope. You can't do that. And I always say, well, thanks very much, Karen, but that's between me and God. Like in my conscience, I know that I can resist Francis in a respectful way. I come from a generation of five generations of Catholic newspaper journalist guys, running Catholic newspapers. So I understand how this works. I understand my obligation. I go to confession, I say my prayers, and I understand how to resist Francis. Not that I've never made a mistake, but I understand how a Catholic can resist him in good conscience. So that's between me and God, how I decide to resist a sitting Pope. It's really none of the state of a contest or any of my critics. It's none of their business at this point. So I think it just depends on who you're talking about when somebody comes along and says you can't criticize the Pope. Are we talking about a Protestant, a mainstream Catholic, a state of a contest? And there's a little bit of a nuanced, different way of explaining how and why we have to do that.
But when John Henry asked you about what your thoughts are about the next conclave, again, you seem to be the half glass full guy, whereas I'm the pessimist in the room. I'm the Debbie Downer. Do you think there's a good shot? I mean, John Henry made a good point. Was it 99 of 120 cardinals have all been appointed by Francis? Seems to be a good stacking of the deck to get the Francis 2.0, yet you're holding out hope.
I am, because again, I go back to the way things used to be. They said there is no way. I remember this so clearly from when I was a young guy, just a kid. There's no way the traditional Latin Mass would ever come back. It's gone. It's been abrogated. It's outlawed. It's illegal. You can't, as a Catholic, you can't even ask for it because you're being more Catholic than the Pope and the Church and blah, blah, blah. And, to see it come storming back in the life of the Church as it has done, you see providence. When you live through something that providential, you see God said, you know what? You think it's never coming back? Hold my beer, and boom, the traditional Mass comes back like it has in dramatic fashion. And so you sit there as a wee little layman, not a theologian, but you look at that, you say, God is awesome. He can do whatever he wants. And then you look historically, as far as the conclaves are concerned, Leo the 13th was supposed to be a little tiny interim pontiff. He ended up having a magnificent and long reign because in God's grace and God's providence, he needed Leo the 13th at that point. Pius IX was supposed to be the liberal. He was supposed to do the bidding of the revolution. Instead, he's the one that gives us a syllabus of errors, and he's like this incredible traditional Pope. You just don't know what's going to happen. And most importantly, I think, for what we're talking about right now with anyone who's following us, don't tell yourself that God's been checked out of this, that God can't change anything. Our job is to do whatever we can. We're always scanning the horizon for any sign of God using human instruments to intervene on behalf of his church. We got to make sure we stand with those guys. So what's going to happen with the conclave? I have no idea. And John Henry's quite right that it doesn't look good in terms of how Francis is stacking the deck. But did anybody see Cardinal Muller all of a sudden coming along and resisting the synod like he's doing, calling it a hostile takeover of the Catholic Church, or Cardinal Pell or Cardinal Burke or Cardinal Zen? They're lining up. So I'm pretty hopeful that in God's time and God's providence, it's going to happen. It's just a question of when. And I pray that I get to see it, because we've been working on this all of our lives. Maybe it's going to be the next conclave that something amazing happens. As is the case with God, something amazing is always going to happen. So we just wait and see. Keep on praying.
Do we still pursue these political options? Because it seems like that's getting worse and worse. I don't see a great outcome there. And do you think it's possible that we can find, maybe there's a few more Bishop Stricklands out there who are on that fence and they're teeter-tottering and they just need that word of encouragement? What would you say?
Oh boy, absolutely. And that's our job. That's something that everybody in your audience can do right now. People say, what can I do? You know, we can't do anything. You guys run your mouths all the time. You talk, but what are we supposed to do? Well, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to pray and you're supposed to have confidence and you're supposed to spread the word and stand up wherever you are and speak the truth, because we want that to trickle up to the bishops. We want more Stricklands. Bishop Strickland is the first to admit he was looking at a lot of tradition-minded Catholics, and he was like, "These people are just reading the Catechism out loud. I want to stand with them." That's Catholicism, you know. So absolutely, you're right. That's what we can do. We must do it. Do it right now. And you know, as far as politics, well, we just saw, I think, with Trump. Now, I'm not a huge Trump guy. I absolutely backed him because he agreed to stand with pro-God, pro-country, pro-life people. I never thought he was quite the leader so much as he agreed to stand with us. But we saw in those 4 years, I think, the best chance politically we had to change the situation, if you want to rely on politics. And they took him down, and they said they were going to take him down. They predicted that they would take him down. They went and took him down. So I think in terms of politics, you got what you just said is absolutely right. You can support whatever politicians are going to bring us maybe buy us a little bit of time to wake up from the Catholic point of view, but don't expect a tremendous amount of change there. And what that then does, it makes the fight that each and every one of us are involved in right now, you on your show, mine on mine, and all the folks in between doing all the good things, homeschooling, the co-ops, raising good kids, doing all this work, it makes that fight the most important fight in the history of the world, potentially, at a point when the Lumen Christi is seeming to go out and Christ is being completely banished from our society. If we can become the light of Christ, we can bring it back. And that's the hope of the world. This war that we're fighting in is absolutely the hope of the world, much more so than running for this or that political office. And I would think that would challenge your viewers and my viewers. This is great. This is the greatest honor that we've ever had. It's an incredible opportunity. We get to be on the side of the heroes. We're standing on the shoulders of giants right now. We get that. But someday, if we do it right, they're going to be telling our story, the folks that didn't give up, the folks that kept the faith. And that's a beautiful thing to be a part of if we have the spittle for it, if we have the courage for it and the guts to keep the faith, to stand with Christ right now. Amazing things are going to happen, but it's going to be tough. But I think that instead of talking about the duty to do that, we really should be talking about the honor of doing that, being allowed at this particular point in time to see what has to be done and have the honor to join together, unite the clans, and go out there and give them hell. This is an amazing moment to be a Catholic.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.